Hi everyone. So today we have a great panel for searching for fellowship and grants. And first, I just let them to introduce themselves and tell us what fellowship they awarded, and then we can start. We have some questions, but feel free to write down your question, and we're gonna go through them at the end. So yeah, who wanna start first?
I can go. My name is Ashley Collmore. I'm a postdoc at Boston University in the United States. And I received the F-31 for my pre-doctoral work as well as an F-32 for my postdoctoral work. And I also applied to the AHA pre-doctoral award, but did not receive that one. So I can talk a little bit about all three of those processes.
Now, Hannah, if you wanna go.
I'm Hannah. I am currently the scientific editor at the CU Anschutz OBGYN department in Colorado in the US. So that's kind of, I have a couple different angles I can come at this from, because right now I do work on editing other people's work as well for applications and grant applications. So I have some perspectives there. I also, during my PhD, received a Vanier and Cirque Award in Canada. And then I also, during that time, served on a committee that did peer review for other student fellowship applications. So I have been somewhat successful in my own funding, but I also have a lot of experience like editing other people's and seeing the different ways that people can be successful doing it. So that's kind of my background here.
I can go next. I'm Olivia. I'm a postdoc at Stanford. I was supported by Canada Graduate Scholarships from NSERC in Canada for master's and PhD, CIHR Banting for my postdoc, as well as the Stryker Orthopedic Research Society Women's Research Fellowship. So I can speak to Canadian fellowships as well as sort of fellowships available to internationals in the US.
Okay. My name's Julia. I'm a postdoc at the University of Denver in the United States. I can speak to the successful applications for National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program, which is something that I received and also ran workshops at a peer level on at the University of Utah.
And you've heard from me before, but I'm Caitlin Banks. I'm a postdoc at Johns Hopkins University and Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, in the US. I received an NIH F-31 during my pre-doc, and then an American Heart Association postdoctoral fellowship in my postdoc. I've also applied for diversity supplement through the American Heart Association. And then I did let's see, there was a Merck Women in Science grant through the Society for Women Engineers. So I've applied and gotten funding through the Society for Women Engineers portal, as well as some like internal fellowships at my institution.
Great. We also have Lauren. So she's traveling right now, but she's gonna like on chat she's available. So as you can see, she posted that she also work on. She's an assistant professor at the University of Alberta in Canada, and she have experience with NSERC. From undergrad, master's, and doctoral and postdoc funding, and she also served as a committee for that grant in Canada. So we also have someone to talk about that. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you everyone for that introduction. Now I'm just gonna start with a few questions, and yeah, we're gonna see who wanna talk first. But I'm sure most of people have this question about how did you find about that fellowship opportunity, and what are the specific strategies you're gonna use to find different opportunities which are out there. Is it easier I tell people who
I
start? Yeah,
I can
okay.
start. For the ones that I was able to get during my PhD, I would say they were pretty well advertised and disseminated through department leadership and stuff like that. Now I do work on identifying opportunities for grants and for the people in my department. This is very US focused, but if you are at an institution in the US, let me see, I had the link. This is just a link to the like homepage, but you would need institutional access. This is absolutely the best way I've found to find fellowships and funding opportunities in the US. If you have an InfoEd account through your institution, you can put in different types of alerts, different keywords, that sort of thing. It pulls from huge databases, and I've found some very niche stuff that the people that I was able to send it to were some of the only people applying to it in the end, and were able to secure stuff pretty easily. So I think that that's been the easiest way I've found in the US, at least, to be able to find a pretty broad amount of stuff that would be applicable for you.
That's really helpful. Yeah.
I also like second what Hannah said. And then so we have a grants and awards channel on Slack. We try when we find stuff that looks relevant to anybody in biomechanics, we try to drop links in there and encourage everybody else to do the same. And I actually, the Society for Women Engineers grant that I got because I think Anna put a link to it in Slack, and then I was applied for it. So like that, just the word of mouth and sharing, I think is, it shouldn't be the way that we have to do this, but like it does really help within our community. So check out our resources and share when you find stuff. And then also, if you are a US citizen, fill out your FAFSA, it's like the free, I don't know, free application for student financial aid. You probably filled it out for undergrad to find out if you were eligible for scholarships or not. Do that as a grad student. I did not realize that I should be doing that for my first couple years, and then I did it later, and then I just like instantly got money from my university, because as a poor graduate student living on my own with the salary that they gave me, I qualified for stuff that I didn't qualify for when I was a dependent of my parents during undergrad. So fill that out every year.
Ashley, do you wanna go next?
I think for the rest of ours, they're all pretty standard, nationwide, well-known grants. So I don't know that I have anything unique to add there. Those are some of the big ones, I think, for both US and Canada.
I suppose I can jump in and just reiterate word of mouth is really useful. I heard about the Stryker Fellowship from a professor who, as I was leaving Canada for the US, said, "Oh, you fit this perfectly, and it's one of the few that you're actually eligible for." And then also just research societies in your fields, like the Orthopedic Research Society has a lot of awards and fellowships. In Canada, like Osteoporosis Canada or Arthritis Society of Canada will often have fellowships as well.
Julia, do you want to add anything, or we can move to the next one?
I think we can move to the next one, but I will say Lauren kind of echoed what Hannah shared with that institutions often have databases.
Great, yeah, thank you for that. So follow on that one, what resources or website or network did you find the most help for writing your application? And also, how early did you start to prepare your application material for that? So just kind of follow on preparing and finding positions.
So I can jump in on that one for the NSF-DRFP. That's due near the end of October, so typically starting it very end of August is kind of a good timeline, and working through it. for a lot of the more common fellowships that exist, especially here in the US, what I found was there are blogs out there where people have accumulated examples of successful applications. So going out on the internet and looking for like successful NIH F32s, F31s, GRFPs, ND-SEGs, they're all out there. Successful applications have been posted. So that's a huge resource, especially if you can find them with the feedback. Even an unsuccessful application with feedback is just as helpful as a successful application without feedback. So finding people at your institution who have applied or in your network who have applied, and have the ability to share their application with you, those are huge, huge, huge resources. And then especially for the GRFP, because that is going to be something a lot of people are applying to at the same time as peers in their cohort. If you can find peers who are going to be able to read your application over and give you feedback, give you explanations on why something doesn't flow, or if it doesn't make sense to them because they're an educated person in your field, but not an expert, which is what your reviewers will be, having that near peer feedback is really key. So those are like my three, find examples. A few months ahead of time is good enough, in my opinion, for the GRFP, and then finding people who you can read theirs and they can read yours.
For timeline, I think you always need to start by finding out when you want to get your recommendation letters sent, like when you want to be able to send your materials to the people writing your recommendation letters, and make that as early as possible and backtrack all of your work from there, because that sneaks up on you a little bit. So I think starting there for timeline. Resources, I think one thing that's underestimated is getting people that are completely out of your specialty area to read applications, depending on how narrow of a like application process it is, or like the society. For the NSF, the person reviewing your grant, your application probably is not anywhere close to being in your field, and so my background is not in OBGYN at all, but I'm editing here, and I have found several times it's been really helpful to be an outsider, like having a level of scientific understanding, but also being able to spot when it's like, you're too deep in this, you see that connection there, but you didn't make it explicit. You need to write out the connection here, or like explain this more, or define your terms or whatever. And I found that really helpful as well when I was writing applications. I had someone from the chemistry department review mine, and she was able to find some stuff that was like ultimately jumps in logic that made perfect sense to me when I was writing it, but didn't make sense to an outside reader. So I think that, getting people from outside your specialty, peer review, and people in your lab and your supervisor is great and super helpful, but running it by someone who doesn't quite know what you're talking about can also provide a lot of really good insight.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, one thing that I didn't realize with the NIH, we talk a lot about study sections, and the study sections for our grants, like research grants, are different than those for fellowship grants. And so the study section for fellowships are actually much broader. There's only like a handful of ones that you can go to. And so the audience is going to be broader than if you were like, or your advisor was writing a research grant and it was going to the musculoskeletal section. Like, there is no musculoskeletal section for fellowships. That's not how it works. So that's a little bit of a different thing between within an institution, but how they handle different research grants to think about. And then let's see, other resources. I wrote a blog about the F31 that's on our website somewhere. So hopefully that's still relevant and helpful. I'll be honest, I don't remember what I wrote in it, but so I might be reiterating some of those same things again today. But yeah, I think to echo the point, like especially getting a lot of feedback on specific aims, or if you have like a one pager for your grant that you are submitting, getting feedback, if you can find a group within your institution to kind of do reviews. A lot of institutions have groups of people that are submitting grants and they will do that review. But if you don't have it, like using this community and saying like, can anybody read my specific aims? Like, I've got time to read your one page. I probably don't have time to read your research strategy, but like, does your overall one pager make sense is definitely something we can do for each other. And I started about 3 months before the due date for both of mine. It wasn't enough time, but I survived. So I recommend starting a little bit earlier than that.
So actually follow on that one. Elham asked a question about if she thinks F32 is you have to be in your postdoctoral position to apply for it, and F31 is for pre-doctoral. And but is there any other NIH grant you aware of we can apply before starting our postdoc position? Just see that relevant to you. So just
Yeah, Caitlin just threw in there's a transitional one. I do know a number of people that submit an F32 before starting their postdoc position, but you do have to identify the university that you'd be working with and the advising team you'd be working with. So that is something that came up a lot when I was reaching out to people about postdocs. They were like, yes, you can do a postdoc here if you get a grant to support you, because I don't have funding for that. And so then you would go through the process of writing that grant with them. Because a lot of the things in that grant are about like, what does the institution offer you? Like, what things are you going to do while you're there? And so that is hard to do if you don't have like a specific place identified. But I think the transitional one is also a good one. What letter is that? Oh yeah, the F99 to K00. It's not often used from what I can tell, but I think it is a good fit for that. And it covers some pre-doctoral and postdoctoral funding.
great. Olivia, would you like to add anything else or talk about your your institution?
I think most things have been covered. I usually start way too late because I'm a bit of a slow writer. I guess I will add that to make sure you check what the institutional internal deadlines might be. And in addition to, definitely getting all of your materials together so that you can send them out to your references well in advance. I usually go about 3 weeks in advance, but also if you need to get any sort of institutional approval letters, or sometimes there's also letter of intents that happen months before. And if you don't submit that, you can't even submit the full application. So it's just something to double check there.
Great. Thank you, everyone. That was really great talk. So I'm going to move to the next question, which is more related to mindset and lesson that you learned. So can you share some of your experience from like an unsuccessful application that you applied and how that helps you to improve for the next opportunity? And and how did you stay motivated after hearing that if someone wanna try and apply, I'm sure that's something that can happen. So if you can talk about your experience about that, that would be great.
So again, I can speak to the GRFP specifically of you have the opportunity to apply for the GRFP. Like I count it as a freebie your final year of undergrad or prior to receiving your master's degree. And that's like a huge thing because the deadline is right before grad school applications are typically due, which means that you have just done all of the thought that you need to do to make sure that you have good grad school applications. So like, even if you don't get that award that year, you've set yourself up for success for applying to all your grad school programs. So that's awesome. Then you're going to get all of the feedback. You got it. That's awesome. If you didn't, which I didn't my first time, you had a ton of feedback saying what you could do better the next time. And because you've done that before you start grad school, then when you go in for your first year or your second year of grad school, you still have one application left. You get to decide when you apply to it, whether you're going to apply your first or second year, and take all of that feedback into account. So one of the great things about, and especially like the NIH F32, I did not just get it. I found out yesterday, and that's okay because I got a lot of really productive feedback that I know I can address each and every single one of their concerns for a resubmission that I hope will be much more successful. So especially when we apply to awards, that we don't get that provide feedback. Not all of them do, but when we get that feedback, that's the biggest thing that says, okay, I know that I can be successful next time because I know what I did wrong and how to do better.
Yeah, both my predoctoral and postdoctoral fellowships were initially, I think both initially not discussed and then converted to successful applications. So, and like if you're talking about like later in your career, like research grants, like the R01, for example, they say like if it's not discussed and it's in the lower 50%, don't reapply because you're not going to make it all the way up to the like whatever 10% cutoff. That doesn't apply for fellowships because the cutoffs are all kind of all over the place. And so I was encouraged to just reapply. You get the written feedback from the 3 reviewers that read your grant, even though you don't get any additional feedback from the study section, because if the score is not discussed, that means they didn't discuss it. So still good feedback, still good to think about, especially because you can tell like when you're reading their comments, you could like while nobody wants to be like the horribly mean reviewer, at the same time you can kind of tell the feeling, like the sentiment of like, I think this is scientifically important, but I'm just not sold on the way that you're talking about it to me. Like that you can fix, because if you have good science but you need a better story, just take more time on the writing, and like people have said, ask other people to read it, get feedback, things like that. And that you can really like, most of us have good scientific ideas hit like together, but then packaging them really nicely into something that like becomes a successful grant is the hard part. And we like even before I had my feedback, I was like, oh, I wish I had done that, or I could have done this, or maybe I had, if I had talked more about this. Like you always have sort of some ideas of things you had to pull out before the page limit or something, and then the feedback can help you drive how you would do that moving forward. I say with pretty much every fellowship application that allows a reapplication, go for it, because you might get it.
Oh, go ahead, Hannah.
Oh, just gonna say, to build off of that, like not just on the science part, but if there's like, depending on what type of fellowship it is, if it's a more, leadership oriented or something like that, you can sometimes, as you're building the application, be like, oh, I know this is kind of a weak spot for me, maybe I haven't done this, I haven't served on any kind of committee, or I'm not involved enough in this. And sometimes the process to find out whether you got it or not is very, very long. And honestly, sometimes by the time you get feedback, it's like a little too late to fix some of those things. So for at least the very next application cycle. So if you are able to kind of start seeing a little bit of these maybe weaknesses while you're writing the application, you can start going about like, how do I get more involved in student organizations, or can I join this committee or whatever, that will allow you to be a little bit more prepared for the next time around.
Liam, I can address your question. I can say that the American Heart Association is open to international students. If anything you're doing is somewhat heart related. And then going back to kind of the first thought here, I think one of the things that I try to remember when I get feedback also is that it is just such a broad audience and people are going to interpret things differently. So when I applied for my predoctoral, I submitted the same project to the AHA and the F31, which people have different feelings on if that's questionable or not, but I followed my advisor's guidance, and one was accepted and one was not. And the feedback was helpful in terms of framing the study as I moved forward and things to consider, but it would, minus being shorter, like they were the exact same applications with very different scores. And so some of that is just like up to who your reviewer is and what they say. And so trying to remember that, it's pretty similar to like when you get paper reviews, you just like don't know who those people are going to be. And that doesn't mean necessarily it's the best thing in the world if you got a really great score, or it's the absolute worst thing in the world if you got a really bad score. Sometimes there is a little bit of a luck of the draw there. I know that the NIH has changed their framework a little bit, but they did used to like talk about the applicant, and for the most part, most of those parts were really positive. So I like to like screenshot those and save them for later to be like, look, these people think I'm a great scientist, even if they didn't like my project. So I think things like that are helpful to have as you're trying to like bounce back and get into it again. It's never really like a personal thing where people are like, you're a bad scientist. Yeah.
Yeah, also, I think that when I was like getting rejected early on for like papers and grants, I didn't realize how many smart people had also gotten rejected for that stuff. And now, kind of a few years down, like the smartest people that I've ever met have all gotten rejected from stuff. So it's really, I don't think I understood how common it was when I was starting. But if you're towards the beginning, like it's just gonna happen. It's okay.
Great. Any other comments on that one? Great. We also have another question here. I'm just gonna share with you about international researchers. If you know in field of biomechanics, I know most of people like for example NIH funds. Most of them are for U.S. citizen. But do you aware of any other kind of like fellowship or scholarship that can apply for international students or researcher in your region that you are working on? And I know, Caitlin, thank you. You share a link for the fellowship here, which is great.
Yeah, so the link that I shared is probably not the best link. That's just like the first one that I found. So keep searching down that trend if you're looking. But yeah, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute offers fellowships. You have to apply through your school first, and then the school sends the top applicants to them. So like there is a sort of a two-step process, and you need to check your institution's website and information on that. But I know multiple international scholars that have applied to that.
I'll also drop into the chat. Not sure if you're looking for student fellowships or postdocs. For postdocs, internationals in the US can apply for K-99s. And then I'll also drop in the fellowship that I currently have, the Stryker Orthopedic Research Society one. That's open to anyone in the US. Also note that in Canada, if you're holding the award at a Canadian institution, international postdocs and graduate students are eligible for the Tri-Council awards. So that's NSERC, CIHR, and well, the social sciences one doesn't apply to us.
Wow, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of links in the chat. So yeah, please feel free to take a look at those. And yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm gonna move to the next question. So for the next one, I mean, I think Kaylee mentioned that, but is there any lesson that you wish you know before applying for your first fellowship? Like, is there any specific things that, yeah, if come up to your mind, if you can share that, that would be great.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is just start, I guess first thing is start early and also seek feedback. And I think we've talked a lot about that already, but getting the peer feedback is very, very important. And I suppose building off of the last discussion around rejections, you know, I just apply, even if you don't think you're going to get it, and almost just view it as a writing exercise. Yeah.
I think, again, these are very NIH specific, but one, making sure you fully understood what each of the documents required. there are a lot for the NIH fellowships. I think both of my packets were close to 100 pages each. And some of those things included like human subject forms that I was doing on the last day because I didn't realize I had to do them. And some of them are documents that you might actually be able to get templates for from your university, and then you don't actually have to do that much work. So if you do have offices, at BU, we have a pre-doctoral and postdoctoral affairs office, or anything that sounds remotely similar to that. They may have resources like that for you. So an example I can think of is responsible conduct of research training is a document you have to submit. BU had a template, and I that talked about the course that they offered that I had taken, and I just put in the date that I took the course. And so then it was like document done, and I didn't have to come up with all of that from scratch. So reaching out about those things. The other advice that I got that was really helpful in terms of like preliminary data, that's a section that often gets included, but you haven't done your study yet, you don't necessarily have data. Showing things that demonstrate that you can do the techniques or the work that you're proposing. So for both of mine, I basically showed the individual parts of like, look, here's some IMU sensor data, and I can collect IMU sensor data. Have I done it to do this exact thing before? Absolutely not. But look, I can do this, and here's some motion capture data. And I'm going to combine all of these things together, but that's how I like demonstrated that I had the skills to do that work. So you don't have to worry about like getting somebody in to do your full study and then you have an N of 1 and you're like, what am I doing? An N of 1 is totally fine also for all of these preliminary data. So don't think like too much about that. You don't have to do your whole study before you submit your application by any means.
I think this is more for typically like more student-oriented fellowships. I know that like some more research proposal stuff is different, but with a lot of student stuff, they do really want you to like tell a story about yourself. And I don't think that I totally understood that. The early ones that I did, especially during my master's, I was very focused on the research itself and not really telling a story about myself as an applicant. But there's usually a bunch of components, and if you can kind of create like you can really allow the reviewer to get a sense of you and, you know, why you care and what your capabilities are and what your experience is by, you know, you want all of the pieces to fit together without, you know, completely repeating themselves over and over. And ultimately, I think just remembering that the people that review your applications are also people, and that means that sometimes they are like in a bad mood, and when you get your review back, it's mean and it's not necessary, you know, but also that like people respond to stories. And so if you can do as much as you can to tell a helpful and exciting story about yourself, then the person reading it will likely respond to that positively.
And on that, because I fully agree with story and making sure that every aspect of your story is showing you in the best light, honest, but the most incredible light that you can, right? Like if you did a senior design course where you had to present your work, you know, and it received top marks, like you talk about that, like you did really cool stuff, and really showing like if you you know, were one of very few undergraduate students who were selected to present your work at the undergraduate research symposium for your university, like point out that you were selected from a large group to be in this small cool select team. So really highlighting those things along your story to show that you've been up at the top. And it sometimes might feel a little gross. You know, it's kind of hard to, a lot of people don't love to brag about themselves, but like brag about yourself. They don't know how cool you are. You have to tell them how cool you are.
Yeah, that's a great point, and reminded me of something that I did in all of my applications is like I talked about papers that I was working on. I talked about like my specific program was really heavy course load for the first 2 years, and then you kind of do the research after that. And so I like talked about that. I'm like, I completed like 48 out of 48 credits. And so now I can dedicate all my time to research moving forward and only the classes I need. And right, like that might account for why I don't yet have a first author publication, but I am working on it with this data that I like told you a little bit about. So you can like really highlight those things and be like, yes, I am a productive scientist and doing work, even if you don't, have the papers or whatever that you may want to your name at that point.
Awesome. Thank you all. I also saw Lauren add her comment there. So she mentioned for her it was look at the evaluation criteria, which I think is really important before you apply, and review your handbook. So to know how you are going to be evaluated, and also she mentioned for your application, she start with there to think about how you can fit in all those criteria. So yeah, these are something that you can keep in your mind, which I think really useful. And also I saw Elham also add another comment about if we have any grant writing support committee in IWB, which I think it's an interesting question. And if not, it too much work to ask creating a support group for each like to support each other. But yeah, I don't know if we can from committee members, someone want to add a comment, that would be great.
So we don't right now, but we love feedback like this because we may in the future. At the moment, since we don't, like, if you can reach out to any of us or like go into the Slack to the grants and awards page and say, hey, I'm writing this type of grant. Could anybody read it? Or has anybody done this before? Or like you can ask all sorts of questions in the Slack about grant opportunities, or even like reach out to a person and say, hey, I'm writing this, like if you found out somebody's writing one, like, hey, do you want to do it together and like review each other's materials or something? So you can like sort of form your own group if you wanted to. And then we're just going to write that down on our idea list for things
Yeah, I
that
got
we
it.
should
Don't
do.
worry.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, to do a really structured thing would be a big lift. But if that's what the group wants, we will do that. We just don't want to do the lift if it's not going to benefit a ton of people. So yeah, we're putting it on our list.
Thank you. So now the next question, it's mostly about material and so application materials. And I know we point some of them out, but I'm just gonna ask you if you wanna add any specific comments about what do you think makes a compelling proposal, a personal statement or research proposal in fellowship application, and also how did you approach getting your recommendation letter or any tip on who you should ask for it?
I can speak to letters of recommendation. I know we've already mentioned, making sure that you get materials on time to your letter writers, asking your letter writers as early as possible. I like to send a very brief, like, this is what I'm applying to. This is the criteria that they're evaluating me on. So that's what Ashley talked about, of make sure you know what you're being evaluated on. And I think Lauren mentioned that too. So really make sure that you give that information to your letter writers, because some fellowships don't care about how much service you do. Other fellowships are evaluating you on service. And so if your letter writers can speak to that, make sure that they will speak to that. I send them basically an outline of all of the cool things that I did while I was working with them. And then I also, at the end of that, always offer, let me know if you want me to draft it for you. And then I will write the most glowing letter of recommendation anyone has ever seen for myself on their behalf. Because again, why would I not? But making sure that you're giving them all of the very specific deliverables that you did while you were there, even if it feels like a small thing, showing that you got trained quickly, that you got up to speed in your lab very rapidly, that you were putting in the extra time, that you sought out trainings, all of the things that you are proud of doing while you were with them. Make sure that they mention, because they might not have actually seen all of those things, but they're going to know that you did it when you remind them. And then as for who should be writing it, that's going to depend on what career stage you're in. For the NSF-GRFP, it's going to typically be, if you did undergraduate research, whoever you did your undergraduate research with. So that's where doing broadly, like not staying in one lab the whole time, can be to your benefit, because then you have 2 to 3 people who saw you do your research. If you're starting in your lab and you've just started, it might be hard for your current advisor to speak to all of the incredible things that you did. If you had a professor with whom you did a design course or who you did your senior thesis with, they're going to be able to speak to all of the great things that you can do as well. But making sure that you are highlighting for them, doing all the heavy lifting for them to make it as easy as possible to write the most glowing letter of reference that anyone's ever read is going to make it so they say, yes, I can take the time to write that letter for you.
Yeah. My advice with letters of recommendation, because I ran into an issue, is make sure you read all the instructions. And for the NIHF, they are very large booklets. So for the predoctoral fellowship, there needs to be a letter from your department talking about things that happen in your department. Turns out that person also can't write a letter of recommendation for you. So that is where I ran into trouble because I had my department head write a letter of recommendation for me. Basically, I got somebody else to sign that other letter within BU. But that was like a rule that was kind of deep within this giant PDF document that I did not catch. And the person actually writing my letter of recommendation was like, who's signing this other thing for you if I'm doing this? So that was helpful from that perspective. The people that I had write my letters for my PhD, my predoctoral fellowship, were members of my committee that were not senior personnel on my grant. So I had my mentor and I had a co-mentor on my F fellowship that was recommended because my mentor was relatively new. He had not gotten tenure yet, had not advised anybody with an F grant. So having more of a senior co-mentor was recommended. But then I had other members of my committee that were not on my a grant officially in any way. So they wrote my letters of recommendation in addition to the department head that I just talked about. Yeah, so that's my recommendation there. And similar to Julia, always give the option to write it myself. And I have actually started using ChatGPT to help me write those things because I really struggle talking about myself. And in my last round for my postdoc, actually 2 people took me up on it. So then to write 2 different letters about myself is really hard. So that is a helpful way of using some of those new tools that we have access to hype yourself up and make it sound a little bit different.
One to go along with kind of telling a story about yourself too, one thing that I have done with recommendation letters that's been pretty effective is like when I start my application, I like look through all the requirements and that sort of thing and kind of create a list of themes that I really want to communicate, and that helps me really stay consistent across all of the different components and make sure that I'm really hitting those aspects, whether that's different accomplishments or different, aspects of my career or something like that. And that also becomes really helpful because you can send it to your letter writers if they do want to write it themselves to be like, please emphasize these things so that it can continue coming through really strongly in those components as well. Or if you're writing it yourself, you can always make sure that you're including those. One thing for choosing letter writers, I do think it's obviously so dependent on the opportunity, but when I was able to get the Vanier, leadership is a huge component of that, and so you have to have 2 academic references and 2 leadership references. That's obviously kind of a unique situation. The academic ones were, of course, people from my academic career, supervisors, that sort of thing. On the leadership side, though, I took a little bit of a chance. I had one done by someone who had been higher up than me, but I also had someone write it that I had been a leader to. And so she was able to kind of speak to my leadership abilities as someone who had been kind of a recipient of it or kind of worked with me. And the feedback I got on that was really, really positive and really effective. So you can like think outside of the box a little bit on some of these of who might be best to speak to these. And if you do want obviously people in positions of authority and that will come through really strongly and effectively, but sometimes there are other people that can be really, really effective that you might not necessarily think of.
Yeah, so I really want to echo everything that's been said so far, especially Ashley with the weird technicalities of some of the grants and who can write the letters. I ran into that also with the American Heart Association, and I don't think that's in the documentation at all. But your department chair has to be listed on your application. You have to link to their like username, and that's it. They don't nothing else. They don't write a letter, no nothing, but they can't write a recommendation letter because they're listed in your package. Weird things happen. So yeah, definitely if you have like a department chair, dean type person that you're trying to ask, make sure that it's okay for your particular application to have them as your letter writer. I also, so like, especially when you're like a graduate student or you're newer at this and you don't have a lot of connections with a lot of people, you can ask your mentors if there's somebody that you have met before that they know well that like you could connect, and then that could become a future letter situation. That, I mean, you generally are going to have to put a little bit of time into that, but like I had a professor that hosted a conference that's a really good friend of my PI's, and he saw me present at that conference. And then um, my mentor was the one who sort of crafted the letter and then sent it to that letter writer, and they packaged it together in a way that like they weren't lying and saying that this person knew me well, but they were being honest and saying like, we have interacted at conferences before, and I very much trust that this person can train this person, and that what I've learned is this other person is trainable. And yes, Lauren threw in to thank and share your results with your letter writers. So like as soon as the application goes in, send them a thank you message. Or I actually got, I really should do this more often, but I got kudos for this, like write handwritten card and mail it, or hand deliver it or something. A thank you note to them for being a recommender and saying like, look, I got my application submitted, and thank you so much for your help. And then once you get your scores back, email them again and say, hey, I got my scores. Whether the scores are good or bad, just thank them again for writing the letter. It's a lot of faculty members write a lot of letters and take a lot of time out of their day to do this, and they really appreciate the just like a quick expression of gratitude.
Great. Those are all great comments. Also, Lauren mentioned for the NSERC applications, there are not a ton of room for personal statements. So if there are accomplishments that can be highlighted by your letter writer, that can be another way to emphasize those key in your application if you want to apply for this specific fellowship. Great. So as we are getting close to our time, I'm just gonna thank all of our panelists, and yeah, yeah, that was all of your answers was really helpful, and I know there are always more questions and more things to follow up. But for today, I think we covered most of the things that I have in the list. Would like to chat about. But is there any last comments or tips for people who wanna start applying for fellowships?
Just apply. You can do it. And if your first one is garbage, you've done it so that your next one can be better.
Okay, awesome. With that, I'm going to thank you all for joining us today. And again, thanks our great panelists today. And yeah, hope see you next month and have a great rest of your day or night.